This time I have an invitation for you to an interesting online talk in the context of translator identity, which will be given by Dr. Nestor Singer Contreras from the Department of Linguistics and Literature at Universidad de Santiago de Chile. In this talk, Dr. Singer will talk about the result of his PhD thesis, which was based on a Chilean translation studies program. So he will talk about the development of translator identity. This event is going to be broadcast via YouTube. So I'll be sharing that link with everybody, let's say in our social media and also on our website. And this talk will take place on August 31st at 6:30 p.m. Chile time. So I hope you can attend and, of course, learn a lot from Dr. Singer and his PhD thesis. So now we can continue with our new episode. Welcome to LT in Chile, a podcast about teaching English in Chile. And in this space, I talk to teacher trainers, and experts who are really, let's say, happy to share their experiences and expertise regarding English language teaching. In this video episode, I decided to invite Kevin Gerigk. So Kevin, I'm going to, let's say, tell everybody how awesome you are. So Kevin has been a language teacher for more than 10 years now. He started out in secondary education in Germany, teaching general English and business English. He completed his undergraduate studies in translation and interpreting in 2019, and then moved to the UK to do his MA in TESOL with applied linguistics. In 2020, he joined Lancaster University to undertake research on PhD level. Throughout his academic career, he has been interested in authenticity in language teaching and data-driven learning, DDL. Whilst his current teaching focuses on English for academic purposes, his research goes beyond the scope as he explores mainly spoken discourse through a corpus linguistic lens in various kinds of learning and testing contexts. His most recent work includes workshops on corpus linguistic in translation training and in teacher training at various universities within the UK, Germany, and Chile, where we met. In addition, he is a research assistant at Lancaster and research associate at Aston University in Birmingham. So, welcome, Kevin. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation to the podcast. And we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is corpus linguistics. It's something that we've been, let's say, talking about. So, Kevin, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. And thanks for the invitation. I think this is a great opportunity to really talk about this shared interest of ours. And I'm very much looking forward to the interview.
Yeah, so thank you very much. One of the main questions I usually ask guests is like how they become or how they have become interested in and involved in teaching English. What about you? What's your case? What's your story behind, say, becoming a teacher?
Um, I would say I became a teacher by chance, pretty much. After school, I was basically just doing some work in the factory and always been good at languages. I was interested in languages, so I started taking evening or night school classes with a more focused English program. And luckily, back in 2012, yeah, it must have been 2012, my local adult education centre, they were desperately looking for an English teacher. Now, I just rocked up as like, right, I think I know what I'm doing. If you give me a chance, I could be a new English teacher. And I was so absolutely lucky. They gave me a chance. And by the end of that year, I had about 8 classes that I was teaching because they were so desperate for a teacher. So yeah, that's how I became or how I started out as an English teacher. They supported me quite a lot. They sent me to Oxford in 2015 to do a teacher certificate. And they also sent me to a little town in Germany where I was doing my examiner certificate for English, Italian, and German. Um, and yeah, I never really left teaching after that.
Usually it's kind of funny to hear, let's say, how people became
Yeah.
teachers because there are so many different stories. Some of them, just like you say, by chance. Some of them, they were very passionate about teaching, and that's one of the things they wanted to do. They wanted to become, a teacher. So that
Mhm.
was, let's say, a goal of theirs. So yeah, so that would be, let's say, one of the first questions. And then I know that you're doing research on corpus linguistics. So
Mhm.
how would you explain that to somebody who doesn't know, let's say, a lot about that? How would you say? Because everybody, when we talk about linguistics, they would say, "Oh, it's about language," but then when they
Mhm.
hear the word corpus, it can be a little confusing. How would you explain that, or what would you say?
Um, well, that's a very good question indeed. I think a corpus is just basically shall we use a metaphor? It is a portal into a huge database of language, be that written, be that spoken, or multimodal as well, depends on what you want to do with it and how it's been collected. But basically, it's just a huge pool of language from a specific background, and it's rich in data, and we can actually, yeah, whatever we want to do with it, really, run different queries with it. Concordance can actually have a look at language in use. I think that's the most holistic description of corpus. It's a huge database of language in use.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that I think I would agree with you. It's like this huge database of, let's say, of language use where you can explore. You have to ask yourself maybe some questions that you would like to answer. But I think, yeah, I agree with you. It's like the amount of information in terms of language. It's infinite. So it's very
There's
difficult.
also patterns. It's patterns you get. It's idiomatic expressions.
Absolutely.
Um,
That's something I really like, trying to find that and trying to see if something works, if something doesn't work, and then you have a chance to try to, test your maybe research question or a hypothesis, and then in terms of language, and then you can try to, let's say, to see if it works or not. Um,
exactly.
yeah, and Kevin, can you tell me about this journey? What made you start, researching corpora? Or like, how did you become interested in, let's say, researching corpora?
Um, that's another good question. When I started out, I first came across the idea of corpus linguistics during my master's program, and I was a bit afraid of using corpus linguistics in the beginning. I think like a lot of people share this experience when they think, "Oh wow, this looks really complex and really, you know." But then I was equally interested in actual authentic language use. I was interested in how not only native speakers but also learners use language, um, and what is out there. And before corpus linguistics, I think most of the work that was done in our field was based on inference, on teachers' ideas, on made-up language examples. And I thought, well, which is okay. I mean, it's been working, for hundreds of years, basically. But equally, this could be a huge access point to actually look at language that's been produced by speakers of a target group. Um, and then I started exploring corpus linguistics, and now for my PhD, um, I look at authentic language use in English materials, English teaching materials, and I just find corpus linguistics to be a super rich source of a language model that we could teach. Like it gives us access to a language model that we could teach. And ever since I kind of got hooked up with corpus linguistics, I thought, right, it can't, like, to be honest, it can't give you all the answers. It won't give you all the answers, but it's a huge access point. And that's, yeah, how I decided to go down the corpus linguistics route. And I've never regretted it so far.
Yeah, I mean, something similar happened to me when I did my master's in Belgium. I took a course called, Corpus Linguistics, and I think the first class was something like that. We had this huge, like computer lab, and I think we were using the COCA corpus, the Corpus of Contemporary American English,
Hmm.
trying to learn like all the, how to start to question like the queries and some, let's say, or maybe some of the commands. I think it was overwhelming, and everybody was like, "Okay, so we need to
In
maybe take a look at this, learn how to use it." But then I started
Mhm.
to realize that how, let's say, fascinating it was, and also that you can actually do a lot of research and, let's say, try to see maybe when a word, first appeared if you're using the Koha corpus, which is the historical, the corpus of
Mhm.
historical American English. And yeah, so there are many, also like many options that you have. You can, research maybe the history of a word.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing you're saying. I think if you just open up a concordance there, you are overwhelmed. Like everyone would be overwhelmed because we're talking about millions and sometimes billions of words. So what to look for. But if you've got a proper like a query, if you've got a hypothesis that you want to test, I think then like a corpus can give you a lot of answers.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you mentioned, let's say, a very interesting point. Like, well, the question that you would like to answer, which has to be, let's say, well formulated. Like sometimes, let's say, in my courses, students, they tend to try to find answers that are very, difficult. Something that's maybe too big, or maybe, or even, too ambitious. in terms of, for example, pronouns. And for example, I remember one case when they were trying to see which pronoun was, let's say, more frequent, he or she, and the corpus was like 20 million words. And of course, the it was kind of slow, and I say, like, maybe let's try to focus this on different areas, because otherwise
Hmm.
it's going here every time you press, start, is going to take a few minutes to actually, try to find an answer, because there are way too many examples. Try to
That's true. That's true.
try
And
to
it's also important in a case like this, when we talk about sociolinguistics or gendered language, um, to really look at your metadata, because what if 90% of your corpus is from a male speaker? Of course, this would skew, the data or the results that you get. So yeah, it's fascinating, really.
Yeah, and also, let's say, how you're going to choose, let's say, data. Like the origin, if it was, like you said, not just look at data without any context. There is also, let's say,
Hmm.
context, let's say, to understand. And one of the projects, we were using Netflix shows, so. And we could look at, variety. We could also look at, let's say, patterns, also like vocabulary. But again, like, the important question was, okay, so what are your expectations, and also what do you know about this? I remember an example of, for
Exactly.
example, like, bloody, bloody as covered in blood, and also as as an adverb, in British English.
Hmm.
So yeah, we have, let's say, many, uh, let's say, different ideas that we can use. And Kevin, I know you're working on your PhD studies. Can you tell
Hmm.
me something about the program? What are you doing there, and how did you choose that program specifically?
Um, well, so what I'm doing is basically I'm looking at the concept of good listenership in teaching materials. So we've got that concept of good listenership via listener response tokens, those little ums and ahs and okays and yes that we find in a conversation. Um, but there's also sentence completion by the listener. There is add-on phrases, and all this kinds of shows, or is supposed to show, um, and involved an active listener who is able to engage with the active speaker. And I'm tagging this in a small subset of the spoken British National Corpus of 2014, using I'm devising an annotation scheme, um, pragmatics approach to this, annotating the data myself. And I apply the same annotation scheme to a corpus of 12, 12 textbooks that were produced for the German market, and I elicit dyadic um, conversations from like the listening parts, and I apply the same annotation scheme to that corpus as well, and then I compare the two data sets and try to find how the listener is actually depicted in teaching materials.
Absolutely, especially if you're dealing
Um,
with the issue of authenticity, trying to replicate an authentic conversation. Like, what would make the conversation authentic or not to, to somebody or to a student?
exactly, exactly, and less scripted.
Yeah,
Because like in course books that it's actors reading out the script.
yeah.
But if we wanted to improve that, like where would we actually start making improvements? So I think this is one of the goals I'm trying to achieve through my research on my PhD at the moment.
Yeah, very good. I mean, I think that that's something that has to do more with, yeah, I mean, I would say, like, it's kind of difficult to separate all the skills, like when you say, I think they're all combined. Like, of course, where you say, like, reading, listening, and how authentic something is. And also because that helps in terms of understanding, if you think that something is not very authentic, you're not going to
Hmm.
try to maybe produce that. But yeah, that's a fascinating, let's say, study. And Kevin, how did you choose that particular program, PhD program?
Um, I I had to look around when I started. I started looking for PhD programs that might be suitable for me. Um, just about half a year before I actually started on it. So during the end of my master's, I thought, right, I'm really interested in this subject now. I want to take it further. I want to do further studies on it. And I did it. I did my master's in Preston at the University of Central Lancashire, and Lancaster literally is just 10 minutes on the train up north. So I explored it a bit, and Lancaster has had a really good reputation um, in corpus linguistics, in language teaching and assessment, and testing and assessment. And to be honest, I applied to a few other unis within the UK, but I very soon found a suitable supervisor, or two suitable supervisors who were very much interested in my project at Lancaster University, and I submitted my research proposal and I got the position. And yeah, kind of the other universities kind of, like, didn't pay much attention, because Lancaster, also the beauty about Lancaster's two PhD programs that we've got in linguistics is that you can do it by coursework and thesis, which I didn't decide to do. I wanted to do a sole research-based thesis, so I started in October, and I started right away with doing research. I mean, obviously, in the first year, and it was in the middle of the pandemic, my research was mainly literature review. That's what I did for the first year.
Oh, what what else could you do at that point?
Exactly. Exactly.
Very, very good, very good. Yeah, but let's say I know that Lancaster also has some online courses related to corpus linguistics. Lancaster is a
Hmm.
university, so yeah, they are very interested in developing that area.
Yeah,
And Kevin,
very
let's
much.
say, what would be the importance of corpus linguistics for teaching English, in your opinion? Like,
Um,
yes.
that's a very good question. I think it depends. Um, Especially when we talk, like, I'm from a German background, and you're obviously based in Chile. So these are both L2 countries, more or less, where English is not widely spoken. It's not an official language. We may now these days, thanks to Netflix and um, all these streaming platforms, we may have some exposure to native speaker English, but I'm not going to comment on how useful that may or may not be. But I think corpus linguistics really can give us a lot of examples of contextualized real life language. Um, we can also choose, because, like, I think in Germany we've got this very much English or British English leaning focus because we're so close to England. Um, Whilst other parts of the world might have a more Australian leaning or American, like US American leaning teaching context, or target language. And this is what corpora actually can tell us. We can compare the two, like the variations. We have so much access to different types of language, to, again, contextualized language, which I think makes corpus linguistics invaluable for teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, let's say something that now that you mentioned geography. In our case, like we're closer to North America, so that's why that's easier for us. So that's why there is maybe some sort of let's say misalignment when we think about British English and North American English, because we have geographical and in terms of culture, movies, like their influence
Hmm.
undeniable. So that's why it's very important to try to explore, let's say, some other varieties, like you said. I agree with you. TV series or platforms like streaming services have actually allowed us to to access other varieties
Yeah.
as well, because in the past it was basically a tape, or maybe or trying to find something on YouTube maybe, but now it's like we have access to it, so it's, let's say, much 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 easier. And a second
And I
question.
think,
Yeah, please go ahead. No.
sorry, and I think it can also help us get away from the idea of the perfect native speaker, because one thing that I've learned, that perfect native speaker does not exist
No.
at all.
Yeah.
So I think it tells us a lot more about how flawed, especially spoken language,
Yeah.
actually is, and that can take a lot of pressure off teachers as well as learners, because they don't have the idea of producing perfect sentences, producing perfect language when they actually use a second language.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think, yeah, there's a lot of debunking of myths that we can actually achieve by using corpus linguistics in the classroom.
Yeah, that's also, let's say, a very good point. I remember one specific example of, some grammar points. He doesn't, she doesn't, and we found tons of examples. She don't, he don't. So and then you're, let's say, faced with, the so you what people actually say. Not everybody, but let's say, so you're like, okay, this is grammatically correct, but this is what people say. So you're, let's say, students are faced with reality, basically. So when
Exactly.
so, like you said, like how flawed or how perfect language is, that we have this idea that we have to produce perfectly, grammatical sentences, which is, of course, depends on the context and some of the conventions. But sometimes you're going to see that that's not the case,
Yeah.
and that's
No,
okay.
absolutely. If I'm writing an academic report, I should probably abide by, more prescriptive grammar rules,
Absolutely.
or more standardized.
Yeah.
But then, as your example, with the she don't, she doesn't. I mean, you travel if you. I'm based in Lancaster, which is bordering onto Yorkshire more or less. You travel to Leeds, which is in Yorkshire, and you will hear a lot of he don't, it don't, she don't. And these are all native speakers. There's millions of native speakers. So who are we as language teachers to tell our students that this is not proper English, whilst there's millions of people in England using those forms?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why let's say corpus linguistics can actually provide, examples, and actually it's going to allow us to explore language, not because it's kind of difficult to say this is correct or this is incorrect. This is something that we cannot, because what happens if we find examples? You're like, oh, okay. So
exactly.
it's not
No, I
supposed.
think it helps us also move more towards the paradigm of acceptability rather than correct and incorrect, which, why
Absolutely.
not? I mean, if it's out there, if people use it, why is it to be deemed incorrect?
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And Kevin, what are you working on right now? Are you working on any research projects specifically?
I'm working on a few things at the moment. So, first and foremost, I should say, or it should be first and foremost, my PhD project, which we discussed previously, the concept of good listenership in teaching materials. I'm also working on a general service list of conversational English with a specific focus on TESOL. So I'm basically using, in the first phase of this study, I'm using the entire spoken British National Corpus, the entire 11.6 million words, and devising a frequency list, which gets cleared up obviously afterwards. So I'm taking off all the, I call them pedagogically invaluable items, which are, your odd swear words, which there are a lot. um, Geographical names, because these things will probably find a way into a structured syllabus anyway. So we don't need corpus frequency to tell us that Italy is more frequent than Spain, because why should Italy be more important than Spain in a teaching context?
Oh
There's
yeah.
no rationale for that. So yeah, that's what I'm currently working on. I'm also working on a methodology paper on DDL approach to ELT, using corpus linguistics for a DDL approach, data-driven learning approach to English language teaching. And I do some work on a examination corpus to look at instruction and learner language. So yeah, basically I don't sleep.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot. But let's say that's something that's fascinating about corpus linguistics, because we can actually analyze anything. I mean, if you wanted to study,
Yeah,
basically, for example, the language of, I don't know, video games, you could actually, transcribe that and say like how they speak, or books or movies, anything, or spoken language. So I think that's something that you just need to have like a clear
definitely.
goal in mind, basically, like a question that you would like to
Yeah.
answer. But that's something that I find, let's say, fascinating. Probably you as well.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Just the range of possible investigations and pieces of research that you can actually start. And I'm only talking about spoken language because that's my focus. When we go into written language, there's a huge host of opportunities there as well, perhaps even more than in spoken language, because the tradition of written language has existed for much longer than the spoken language
Yeah.
corpora.
Yes. Very good, very good. That also we talked about in a previous conversation that sometimes, when people would like to use corporate linguistics, that's intimidating for lots of people. In your experience, what are some of the challenges that teachers face when trying to use corpora in the classroom?
That's a good question. I think there can be many, many a challenge for especially novice users.
Mm,
I remember back when I started using it. Um, you have a plethora of tools. You've got Anconk, you've got Lanxbox, you've got Sketch Engine, you've got so many analysis tools, so many concordances, so many programs, and they are. I no, I can't say that they're all the same, but they're very similar. Yet they're very different to each other as well, and the way they work with and the corporate they bring with them. So I think just really choosing the right tool for what you want to do in the classroom can be quite a challenge. And also, I remember when I started my PhD and I really got into corpus linguistics, I was naive enough to think that a corpus can answer every question you want to ask. No, it can't. Like, truth be told, it can't. And so it's really important to know what you can actually, how far you can take corpus in the classroom and where to draw a line.
No.
What the corpus can't tell you. I think back in the day, another challenge may have been accessibility of corporate and technical know-how, which luckily I think now is not so much more the case because we've got, for example, Lanxbox, which was developed at Lancaster University or Ankong by Lawrence Anthony in Japan. Um, and they all these tools, brilliant tools, come with a host of freely accessible corpora. So I think that is one of the challenges that we finally are in the process of overcoming. Um, but yeah, I think yeah, just the way of what tools to use and how to actually use them. This, at least in my experience, was a huge challenge when I was a novice user of Corpus Linguistics.
Yeah, and also, well, in my own experience, I think that some people would like to use it more, but they seem to be
Mhm.
reluctant, to use a condenser maybe to teach grammar or vocabulary because they find the interface kind of intimidating, and also, like you said, all the functions are sometimes are difficult to start using, but once you get the hang of it, you see like, oh, they're pretty user friendly, or they are very intuitive.
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. And especially with the new updates of the new Ankong, for example, there's some brilliant things happening there. So I think this is getting more and more user friendly
Yeah.
now.
Absolutely, absolutely. Kevin, what piece of advice would you give teachers who would like to include activities based on corpus linguistics in their lessons? Like, what's something that you would consider to be essential, or something that you consider to be maybe a good idea?
Don't give up. I think that's the first piece of advice. Don't give up. If you're really interested, if you really want to use it, just, take a bit of patience, don't give up too quickly, and give yourself time to learn. Give yourself time to explore. I mean, you can read the user manuals. I'm a rather practic oriented or practical guy, so I really hate reading pages and pages of user manuals. I normally just go into the program and see what I can explore and do with it. But yeah, if you're more of a user manual person, then yeah, sit down, read them 40 pages of user manual for Ankong or Lanxbox. Um, but the most important bit, I think, is really have the patience to explore, to keep learning what it can do, to keep exploring. Because I think, at least for me, it really paid off in the end. I think that's the most important bit of advice I would give to novice users, obviously.
Yeah, I think I completely let's say agree with you in the sense that actually corpus linguistics has allowed me to help students understand how language works, and moving away from correct or incorrect. Like when we have like you said, some there is a very good book, Language Myths, and when they talk about like what this is supposed to be, like the perfect language, like something that we just like talked about. And then like, and for me it's surprising when students actually agree with those ideas because they haven't explored language, let's say, so much.
No, definitely. And also, I think once you are a bit more attuned with English as a teacher, you will come to a point where your students, they write something, they say something, and you just go,
Mm,
ah, that sounds a bit odd. I can't really tell you why, but it just sounds really odd. And that's where corpus can actually help you by when you go through collocates, for example, or idiomatic expressions, engrams, and all that.
yeah.
Like, well, it's just not used. That's why it sounds odd, or it's very low frequent. Not many people use it. So that's a better explanation. Is just go, don't do it because it sounds odd.
Yeah. Let's say when something like that happens, like something basic, I would just go to Google, Ngram viewer, something
Hmm.
like quickly, or just like basically Google with quotation marks. It would be like, how many
Yeah.
hits do you have? And then I would use something like this scale, sketch engine, or something better. And once we have like a class, we can use Ancon. That's the one we usually use. But yeah,
Hmm.
like, we go through different stages rather than just answering. It just sounds odd just because,
Exactly. No. And then we can also show by collocate networks, for example, what would sound less odd.
Yeah.
And this, I think, would then be quite a steep learning, or could lead to quite a steep learning curve for the students.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, let's say my own experience as a teacher and researcher, we've been using Copra for, let's say, for a couple of years now. Actually, one of my colleagues, Nestor, he, as part of his master's program, now he completed his PhD. He worked with Corpus Linguistics, so we had this idea of trying to include it in the translation program, which has been
Hmm.
an adventure with also with Carlos Veloso. So we've done some research for, let's say, like I said, for many years, and actually we just published an article on teaching English based on DDL, like you, something that we can
Hmm.
talk about and also share. Trying to teach
Yeah.
grammar, in a translation program in Chile, with by means of a concordancer, and I'll be sharing that in our show notes. And I think you mentioned that you're doing something kind of similar, or you would like to do something like that.
First of all, congratulations to the publication. I think it's the one that was on that Nestor showed on Twitter
Yes,
a few weeks ago, or
yes.
maybe a week or two ago. Great paper. I really enjoyed reading it.
Thank you very much.
Um, and yeah, sorry, what was your question now?
The question was basically, like taking this research, because of course research, carrying out research, it's a
Mm.
long process, right? And
Yeah.
let's say, but there are many benefits, and also sharing, let's say, what we do as a researcher.
Mhm.
It can also, let's say, help teachers understand how this works, because, for example, if you see something like DDL or data driven learning, that can sound a little intimidating at the beginning.
Yeah.
So people are like, they are a little afraid of that. So let's say it's really interesting to actually see what, let's say, what other teachers do and say, oh, but that's something I can do. It's like, it doesn't
Hmm.
like something that's impossible to do. Maybe you see some screenshots, like the software, but it's not impossible.
Hmm.
So I think this is something that encourages people to actually share what they do, in terms of research.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And there seems to be a growing interest amongst language educators in corpus
Yeah.
linguistics. As you said, you are working on a translation program, translation training, translation studies program, and that was one of the latest workshops I've given. Yeah, that was 2 weeks ago. Um, I was invited back by my old university, where I did my undergrads in translation and interpreting, and they actually invited me back just to talk about how we can use language, how we can use corpus in this specific field of English for specific purposes, namely like translator training and translation studies. And I think people are becoming, or teachers are these days, are becoming more open to the idea of using corpus tools simply because it's more accessible these days
Yeah.
than it might have been like 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's say that if we look at the first versions of Amcon, it was, let's say, very difficult, maybe, yeah, not so easy to use, but now the one now, it's, I would say, awesome.
Fascinating, isn't it? I was lucky to meet with Lawrence Anthony actually last week. It was
Uh-huh.
at the conference in Ireland. That was actually 1.5 weeks ago. Just after I'd come back from Germany, I went to Ireland. It's been a crazy, crazy few weeks really. But and I sat down with him in Lancaster the week after the conference. We had a chat and just seen what Ankong is now able to do. The new, I think it's 4.1 is absolutely mind blowing. So yeah, that is. I think this is going to be a great tool that we can use in an educational setting, not only for research but also for language teaching, particularly.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one I would like to be using. And of course, I'll be teaching in a couple of weeks after the winter break finishes. I know that it's been a hot summer for you there, but for us, it's been a cold winter.
You know what? Cold is relative. I remember when I visited Santiago, it was cold, but that's like British summer.
No, no, let's say for our South American standards, it's super cold over there.
Yeah.
I don't know, in the Antarctica. And my last question is, Kevin, in your opinion, what are the pros and cons of using, corpus linguistics in the ELT classroom?
That is another very good question. Shall we start with the cons because there are fewer, I believe.
Okay.
So I think the cons these days really is access to technology.
Mm,
For some countries, I remember in Germany it's quite, or it used to be quite difficult. I'm not sure if it's still the case, but up until like 2, 3 years ago, basically pre-pandemic, having proper stable internet connections in German schools was a bit of an issue simply because the country is not big on digitization, shall we say. Um, and I believe in other countries in the world as well, a stable internet connection may be an issue. Um, um, Apart from that, I think selecting, as I mentioned before, selecting the right tool is something that can be overwhelming for teachers.
Yeah,
Selecting the right corpus, which all can be remedied off by proper training. So I think all the issues we've got, yes, there might be the technology infrastructure, fast internet, broadband internet, that would actually allow us using concordances and corpus software in the classroom. That is something that might be beyond our control. However, all the other problems with like corpus selection, application of tools, and so on, I think if we just invested a bit more in actual teacher training, in terms of corpus linguistics and how to use it, I think this is at the moment a con, but it could be transformed into actually a pro if or once we start using this within training programs.
absolutely.
That's just my humble opinion. And also, in terms of pros of corpus linguistics in the classroom, I think it's, yeah, as I mentioned before, you've got access to real life language, you've got access to contextualized language. And not only does this allow for teacher centered, but also for an exploratory and autonomous
Yeah,
application in the classroom. You can give students a question, a research questions when we go into TBLT, task-based language teaching, and DDL. We give them a question, something to find out, and we just send them off. Um, and I recently published a paper on what motivates learners most in a German context. And one of the overarching things was we want to be left alone. We don't want the teacher to tell us anything. We want the teacher to give us the task, and then they should let us go and explore, give us autonomy, um, which I can only understand that point of view. So I think this is where corpus linguistics really links in as well. And we can also move away, and I think this is one of um, the biggest things or the biggest advantages. When I remember, I've learned a few languages, or I studied a few languages because it's a hobby. I just really like languages. Um, and when I did Italian, when I did Spanish, even when I did English, when you are, until you reach a certain level of proficiency, you're always translating your head and you go word by word, and the outcome is somewhat understandable, intelligible, but and I think corpus linguistics can really help us in the classroom specifically to go away from the idea of we go word by word and this is how a language works, but it allows us to actually look at
yeah,
chunks of language, phrases, idiomatic expressions, collocation,
yeah.
and not only with inferred examples, but actually with real examples. So we can see how do not only native speakers, but how do proficient non-native speakers use the language and what's in it for me.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That was a very long answer.
No, but it's very good because actually, yeah, I agree with, let's say, actually, yeah, all of them, I would say. Yeah, the aspects to technology can be, let's say, a problem, having a computer lab, having enough number of computers and things like that. But the pros are like basically students can actually, become like language detectives, they can do some research and
Exactly.
actually like, okay, whatever you want to find, so try to, but let's say we have to leave them alone. So that's something.
Yeah, no, it's like that concept of autonomy, learner autonomy, and the exploratory quest that especially young learners who are very tech savvy, we should say, or should be able to get used to digital application very quickly. I
Yeah.
think that's something they could really appreciate and that would increase their motivation as well.
Well, Nestor Singer, he wrote a paper on, let's say, trying to explain that, like these transfer of, let's say, control, like going from the stage where you can
Mhm,
show everything, how everything is done, and then you're like,
mhm.
okay, half, and then you're like, okay, you do this by yourself now, basically.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, very good, very good. And to finish up, Kevin, what resources or alternatives? What would be like your go-to resources? What's something that you would really, let's say, recommend, or maybe even something that you've written yourself?
Mhm. Um, Obviously, once that article, that DDL article I'm working on at the moment is out, I would have to mention that here, but unfortunately, it's not been published yet. However, what I think, what my personal Bible of corpus linguistics is is the O'Keefe et al. 2007 book from Cambridge University Press, From Corpus to Classroom, because
Mm,
that, I think, in about 250 pages really nails down what corpus linguistics can do, or at least in 2007 was able to do for language teaching. And also Ivor Timmis, his 2015 publication, Corpus Linguistics for ELT. I think it was the Palegrave was the
yeah,
publisher. I'm not entirely sure
definitely.
about
Yeah,
that though.
yeah, I think so.
These two books are gold mines, I think, when you want to use an applied approach to corpus linguistics in the classroom.
Yeah, and then you can try to find. There are many resources also online, like Lancaster. I know that they have many resources, but let's say
Yeah.
also it depends on the teacher's creativity in terms of what they would like to, how to explore and in terms of
It,
exercises.
it does. Now that you mentioned Lancaster, I should have mentioned that before. I just completely escaped my mind. But we've got the BNC Lab at Lancaster, which is a free to use online tool, which is a concordancer, but also includes metadata. So you can check when you have a phrase or a query, you can also check who says it in terms of where in England is or where in the UK is this used, what age group, what social group. Um, and we even now at Lancaster, that is fairly new, we have it's called ELT materials corpus for schools, and that basically is a host of worksheets with tasks more or less DDL driven or DDL aligned. And you've got so many different queries. My favorite that I've never used in the classroom before, I'm still a bit reluctant to use, was how we use the intensifier, the F word, as an intensifier rather than a swear word. There's a worksheet on that, but there's also more serious topics on how to decline offers politely, how what actually is politeness and what is real politeness and what is just, letting someone down very gently.
Yeah.
And this in connection with BNC Lab is a great pool of resources.
Actually, I was checking that out, and I saw some exercises. I think there was something on singular day, and they gave
Mhm.
some examples, let's say, on that,
Yeah,
which was, let's say, awesome. And yeah, so maybe if you want, Kevin, you can share those two websites with me, and I can share them, let's say, on our website, triple
oh
W.
yes, I'll be delighted. Yeah,
Absolutely, I can share that there. So no, very good. So there are many resources. So I think it depends on the creativity of the teacher in terms of exercises.
exactly. If you want to create your own materials, perfect. Go ahead, use a concordance and really just go ahead. But if you need some more assistance or some more guidance, I think the work we do at Lancaster or the things we publish at Lancaster um, are great resources as well.
So thank you very much, Kevin. So that concludes our video episode with Kevin Gerigk. So Kevin, thank you for sharing your experiences and ideas and your research in this episode. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach us at podcast@eltinchile.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can visit our website www.eltinchile.com, where we usually publish, some of the materials maybe that Kevin is going to share, a website, a paper, or maybe the books that you mentioned. We can share them there for people to share. And this is a space to collaborate. So thank you very much, Kevin, again. I don't know if you have some final.
Thank you very much, Jose, for having me for having this interview. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.